October 12, 1943, at 23,000 feet over the Rhineland, a B-7 flying fortress. Tail number 423067 lurched as a 20mm cannon shell ripped into its number 3 engine. Thick black smoke belched from the cowling. In the cockpit, First Lieutenant Robert Hayes felt the control yoke tremble under his hands as the aircraft's nose dropped about 15 degrees. In the radio room behind him, Sergeant Mike Donnelly watched hydraulic fluid spray along the fuselage wall, like blood spurting from an artery. The fortress was dying, and they still had roughly 140 miles to England. Above and to the right, First Lieutenant James Howell witnessed the hit. His P-47 Thunderbolt, named Jersey Thunder and marked below the cockpit, banked hard to keep the damaged bomber in sight. Howell was 24. A New Jersey farm boy with 312 combat hours over Europe and 72 missions flown. He knew the fate of stragglers. The bomber stream kept going, standard doctrine, because one crippled ship couldn't endanger the whole formation. Hayes understood that. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Frank Morrison, was already running numbers in his head. 3 working engines now. Top speed perhaps 160 indicated. Altitude bleeding off around 200 feet per minute. German fighters circling like predators. Howell keyed his radio. "Big friend, this is Jersey 27. I have you visual. Stay with me." Hayes's reply came tight with strain. "Jersey, we're losing hydraulics. Number 3's on fire. Can't hold altitude." "Copy that, big friend." "I'm not going anywhere." It was a pledge Howell had no authority to make. His fuel gauge read about 58 minutes remaining, maybe less if he pushed the throttle. The bomber was crawling at 140 knots. England lay roughly 90 miles to the northwest. The arithmetic favored no one. Their mission had started 6 hours earlier at Thorpe Abbot's, base of the 100th Bomb Group. Hayes and his crew were on their 19th sortie, a daytime precision raid on ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. Intelligence had promised light opposition. Intelligence had been disastrously wrong. Some 320 B-7s had crossed the channel that morning, and the Luftwaffe met them with over 400 fighters, Messed Bf-109s and Fallwolf 190s, swarming up from a dozen airfields. The sky became a butcher's yard. Bombers burned and fell, spinning toward the earth, leaving wreckage and men behind. P-47 escorts fought fiercely, but their range was limited. At the German frontier, they turned back, fuel tanks nearly dry. Hayes's fortress had taken its first hit during the bomb run. Flak exploded beneath them, shrapnel punching through thin aluminum. In the ball turret, Sergeant Eddie Martinez took fragments in his left shoulder. In the waist, Corporal Tommy Briggs was knocked out when a chunk of metal dented his helmet without penetrating. Then the fighters arrived, 4 FW-190s diving from 11-hour high with wings strobing cannon fire. Up top, Sergeant Paul Richter in the turret poured .50 caliber into the lead attacker. Tracer formed a lethal arc. One FW-90 blew apart in mid-air, disintegrating into falling wreckage, but the other 3 pressed home their assault. That's when number 3 engine failed. 15 minutes after leaving the target area, Hayes wrestled to keep the plane steady. The fortress sank through 22,000 feet. Morrison labored to restart the crippled engine, but the propeller just windmilled. Worse, hydraulics were failing. Without pressure, the turrets wouldn't traverse. The bomb bay doors sagged partially open, adding drag. "Skipper," Morrison said quietly, "we should tell them to bail out." Hayes didn't answer at once. Below stretched occupied France, German-held territory. Men who jumped risked capture if they survived the descent. Partisan help sometimes arrived, but the odds were slim, and Martinez was hurt. Could he manage a parachute with a shredded shoulder? "Not yet," Hayes said. Howell scanned the sky above. His 850 caliber guns were loaded. The Thunderbolt carried 3,400 rounds total, about 34 seconds of continuous fire, and he'd already spent 600 rounds earlier, leaving maybe 28 seconds of sustained shooting. Movement at 2 o'clock. He turned his head and saw 3 Bf-109s in splinter camouflage approaching from the south. They'd spotted the straggling bomber. Stragglers meant easy prey, and Luftwaffe pilots knew it. Howell didn't hesitate. He shoved the throttle forward and banked, inserting his fighter between the bombers and the attackers. The P-47's Pratt & Whitney R-2800, roared, 2,000 horsepower driving him, and the thunderbolt surged to about 300 knots. The lead Messerschmitt saw him and tried to brake left, but too late. Howell aligned the shot and squeezed the triggers. All 8 guns erupted together, and the recoil slowed his fighter noticeably. Spent casings streamed from the wings. Tracers converged on the 109's fuselage. Solid impacts ripped through the German canopy and cowling. White glycol sprayed from the radiator. The Messerschmitt rolled inverted and dropped away, smoking and broken. The remaining 2 109s scattered, climbing for height. They'd expected an easy kill and found otherwise. Instead, they ran into a P-47 piloted by someone who knew his business. The German fighters pulled back to 25,000 feet to weigh their options. Inside the fortress, the crew heard Howell's guns and realized they had protection. "Jersey, thanks for the save," Hayes transmitted. "But you're burning fuel. You should head home." "Negative, big friend. You've got company all the way to the fence." The fence, fighter slang for the English Channel, was about 90 miles away. At 140 knots ground speed, that translated to roughly 38 minutes. Howell glanced at his gauge again, 42 minutes remaining. It would be tight. Dangerously tight. The bomber kept losing altitude. 20,000 feet, then 19,000. Hayes wrestled to slow the sink, but 3 engines and a half-open bomb bay couldn't hold level. The airplane behaved like a heavy wounded slab of metal. At 18,000 feet, they slid through a thin cloud deck and for half a minute flew by instruments alone. When they broke out into clear air, Howell saw fresh trouble. 5 more Bf-109s in a Vic at 12 o'clock. Level. Reinforcements had arrived. The attack was becoming coordinated. Howell shoved himself head-on at the formation, a tactic that required steady nerves as 2 planes closed at a combined speed above 500 knots. The Germans hesitated. One pilot figured 1 P-47 against 5 should be easy, but Howell had already knocked 1 comrade from the sky and damaged another. At 3,000 yards, he fired. Long-range bursts usually don't do much, but Howell wasn't aiming to kill. He wanted to disrupt their cohesion and make them flinch to protect the bomber behind him. Tracers arced through the air and the lead Mi-109 peeled off. The formation unraveled. Howell dove under them, rolled inverted, and came up on the trailing 109, landing more hits. That enemy fighter shuddered and banked away, streaming smoke. The fight kept going. 2 Messerschmitts swung to attack from the rear. Hayes's tail gunner, Sergeant Walt Kendrick, put a burst into one attacker with his twin 50s, but the guns jammed after 4 rounds. Kendrick cursed and fumbled to clear the stoppage. Howell saw the new threat and hammered a brutal high-G turn. His vision gray-lined as the G's punished him. The big P-47 wasn't a nimble dogfighter, but Howell had learned to make it dance. Closing to 600 yards on the nearest 109, he fired. 20mm cannon shells and 50 caliber rounds stitched along the Messerschmitt's wing. The wing tore upward and came away under stress. The fighter cartwheeled and vanished into the clouds. The remaining enemy planes broke off and fled east. In 5 minutes, 3 German aircraft were gone or crippled. Too costly a price. A brittle quiet settled. Engines still rumbled and wind whistled through torn metal, but the immediate storm had passed. Hayes let out one long breath and said, "Jersey 27, you just saved our lives." Howell didn't answer at once. He was checking his fuel. 28 minutes remained. The channel lay 65 miles ahead, and the bomber was down to 16,000 feet and still falling. Morrison looked to Hayes. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Hayes read the instruments. Altitude, airspeed, fuel in tanks 1 and 2, oil pressure on the 3 running engines, and the numbers all told the same unforgiving tale. "We'll make it to the channel," Hayes said, and left the rest unsaid. After that, they'd ditch in freezing water and pray an RAF launch found them before hypothermia took hold. Survival time in the North Sea in October was about 20 minutes. Howell ran his own sums. His gauge now read 23 minutes. The bomber sat 58 miles from the English shore. At their present speed, that meant roughly 24 minutes of flight for the bomber. Howell would burn out 1 minute before they reached safe water. He chose to stay. He pulled the throttle back to a minimum cruise, leaned the mixture for economy, set the prop pitch for best endurance. Every trick he knew to squeeze out extra minutes. Maybe he could eke out 2 more. Below the French countryside unrolled hamlets, fields, roads with German trucks moving toward the front. Enemy territory all the way to the sea. The fortress dipped through 15,000 feet. The blaze in engine number 3 had died, nothing left to feed it. But the windmilling prop and mangled cowling produced terrible drag. Hayes trimmed as best he could, but controls felt heavy and sluggish. The hydraulics were nearly spent. At 13,000 feet, Howell stayed close, weaving in an S pattern above and behind the bomber, eyes flicking constantly between sky and fuel. By 12,000 feet, the bomber punched through another cloud layer, and when they emerged, Morrison spotted contacts first. Fighters 10 o'clock high, 4, then 6. Hayes felt his stomach tighten. 6 BF-109s in a clean attack formation were diving from 17,000 feet. This was no probing harassment. It was a dedicated kill package. Howell saw them too, 6 against 1, and knew his Thunderbolt carried maybe 20 seconds of effective fire if he spent it wisely. He shoved the throttle forward. Fuel economy didn't matter now. The P-47 screamed upward and he chose the lead fighter, opening fire at 200 yards to upset their geometry. The tracers forced the lead to break, and the precise attack pattern collapsed into confusion. 2 fighters went left, 2 right, 2 kept going. Howell picked the rightmost 109 and closed to 400 yards, then fired. The rounds hammered the German tail and it came apart, pitching up, stalling, and spiraling away. But other attackers struck from different angles. 2 109s dove at the bomber from 7 o'clock high, cannon flashes cutting across the sky. Inside the fortress, Kendrick finally cleared his jammed guns and swung the twin 50s onto a target, ripping rounds into an attacker's engine. White smoke erupted and that fighter pulled up and away, but another kept coming. 20-millimeter shells punched along the bomber's left wing, and one detonated in the number 2 fuel tank. The tank was nearly empty. Most fuel had been burned reaching the target, yet vapors remained. Flames flared from the wing. "Fire in number 2!" Morrison shouted and yanked the engine fire suppression. CO2 flooded the bay and the blaze sputtered out, but number 2 was ruined. Its propeller froze. The bomber was down to 2 working engines. Through 11,000 feet, altitude bled away. Hayes struggled to keep a manageable descent. The dead engine's weight and drag created a nasty left-roll tendency. "Skipper, we gotta bail," Morrison said louder. Hayes shook his head. Not yet. Jersey was still with them, and he still was. Howell had been locked in a savage dogfight at 10,000 feet. His P-47's rugged frame had saved him twice as cannon rounds hit, but bounced off armor behind the cockpit. One round tore through a left wing but missed the tank by 18 inches. Howell managed to destroy another Mi-19 with a deflection shot from an impossible angle. It exploded in a brief orange ball, leaving a black smear across the sky. The remaining 3 German fighters finally disengaged. Their fuel was low and the cost had been too great. Howell rejoined the bomber as it descended through 9,000 feet. His fuel gauge read 11 minutes. The channel lay 42 miles ahead. At the bomber's present speed, that equated to about 18 minutes of flight, 7 minutes short of what Howell would need. He keyed the radio. "Big friend, I'm going to have to leave you soon. Fuel state critical." There was a long pause before Hayes answered. "Understood, Jersey. You've already done more than anyone could ask. Get yourself home." "Negative. I'll stay with you as long as I can." In the cockpit, Morrison leaned toward Hayes and said, "He's going to crash trying to save us." Hayes knew it was true. The math was merciless. If Howell stuck with them to the channel, he would run dry over enemy soil and be forced to bail or crash. Either outcome meant becoming a prisoner of war. 1,000 feet. The bomber's rate of descent had climbed to 300 feet per minute. At that pace, they would be skimming the waves before reaching shore. A water landing at that speed would likely tear the airframe apart. Even in calm seas with an intact airplane, the chance of surviving a ditching might be only about 30%. This fortress was barely coherent. In the radio room, Donnelly used the last of the hydraulic pressure to crank the landing gear down by hand as a precaution if they reached England. They'd need wheels, but with 2 engines. Out and battle damage across the fuselage, any wheels down arrival would be precarious. 7,000 feet. The French coast crept into view, then 35 miles of cold gray water, then England beyond that, safety and home. Howell's fuel needle nudged the red, 8 minutes remaining, maybe less. The gauge was unreliable at low levels. Below, the coastal town of Dieppe slipped under them as flak batteries opened up. Black puffs exploded around the bomber. Haze jinked left and right to spoil the gunner's aim. One burst rocked the plane and sent shrapnel into the skin. Corporal Briggs, now conscious after earlier being knocked out, felt warmth run down his leg. A fragment had clipped his thigh. "Waist gunner hit," someone called over the intercom. "How bad?" Hayes demanded. "Not bad, Skipper. I can still walk." 6,000 feet. They crossed the shoreline and moved out over the channel. The sea below looked dark and inhospitable. Moderate seas with white caps, water roughly 50 degrees. Survival time about 20 minutes before hypothermia. Howell checked his gauge again, 5 minutes. The English shore remained 28 miles away. He would run dry about 12 miles short. He made his call. "Big friend, I'm heading for the deck. I'm going to set her down in the water close to you. When you ditch, we'll be in the same area. Better chance for rescue." Hayes understood. Howell was choosing to ditch in the channel beside them instead of turning back to the continent and surviving as a prisoner. "Jersey negative. You can still make it back to France. You'll survive as a POW. Not leaving you, big friend. We're going home together, or not at all." The exchange over the intercom transformed 10 men who had accepted likely death into a crew with hope. Their rescuer was staying with them. 5,000 feet. Howell descended in step with the bomber, matching their sink. His gauge read 3 minutes. When the engine quit, he might eke out roughly 90 seconds of glide. 4,000 feet. Hayes scanned hopelessly. No rescue boats, no ships, only empty ocean. 3,000 feet. Howell's engine gasped, first signs of fuel starvation. He switched tanks, trying to grab any residual fuel in the lines for an extra half-minute. 2,000 feet. Hayes began the ditching checklist. Morrison read items in a steady, detached voice. "Crew, prepare for water landing. Assume crash positions. Impact in 90 seconds. In the tail, Kendrick cinched himself in. Donnelly braced in the radio room. In the waist, Briggs and the other gunners jammed themselves between racks. In the ball turret, Martinez rotated to horizontal and tried to climb out. The ball would be a coffin in a ditching. 1,000 feet. Howell's engine coughed again, longer this time. The prop windmilled for 2 seconds before coughing back to life. Hayes lined the bomber into the wind to reduce touchdown speed and minimize tearing. They slipped through 800, 700, 600 feet. Then Howell's engine died. The sudden quiet was terrifying. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 that had thundered for hours stilled. The prop continued to windmill, but without thrust. The P-47 became a heavy glider with miserable glide ratio. Howell pushed the nose over to keep speed. He needed energy for the landing. Too slow would stall and cartwheel. Too fast would rip off the wings. 400 feet. Hayes flared the bomber, pulling the nose up to bleed speed. Airspeed fell from 120 to 110 to 100 knots. The bomber struck the water. The impact was savage. The fuselage slammed into wave crests. The airframe flexed, rivets blew, seams split, and a geyser of water rose. The bomber skipped once, twice, then settled and slid forward in a sheet of spray. Inside, the crew slammed against restraints as equipment tore loose. The bombardier, Lieutenant Carl Vickers, dislocated a shoulder against the panel. Martinez, still crawling from the ball turret, was crushed when the turret collapsed. The airplane ground out for 300 yards before coming to a halt as water gushed through dozens of cracks and holes. "Everybody out now!" Hayes shouted. The crew scrambled for exits, the top hatch, waist windows, nose hatch. Morrison kicked open the escape hatch above his seat and hauled Hayes toward it. They tumbled onto the wing as the bomber listed left and began settling. 2 minutes, maybe, before it sank. 200 yards away, Howell fought his own fight. The P-47 hit nose first at about 90 knots. The engine, 2,000 pounds of mass, pulled the nose down like an anchor. The fighter flipped forward, and Howell was slammed into the gun sight. Blood ran into his eyes as cold water flooded the cockpit. He fumbled the canopy release with numb hands. The canopy came off and water surged in. Howell fought his flight gear and parachute free as the fighter sank. He broke the surface as the tail vanished beneath the waves and saw the bomber about 400 yards away. Men were jumping into the sea and orange rafts were deploying. Some emergency kit had worked. Howell inflated his Mae West and began the agony of swimming toward survivors, each stroke stealing strength as the cold drained him and his boots felt like lead. He reached a life raft and hands hauled him aboard. Hayes's face broke the water nearby. "Jersey, you crazy bastard, you actually did it," Hayes said. Howell could only shiver. He was numb from cold. A blanket was thrown over him. They counted heads. 8 men in the first raft, 3 in the second. 11 total, which matched the 10-man bomber crew plus 1 fighter pilot. Everyone had survived the ditching, except someone was missing. "Where's Martinez?" Hayes demanded. Silence, then Donnelly answered quietly. "He didn't make it out, Skipper." "The ball turret!" Hayes closed his eyes. 9 saved, 1 lost, the brutal arithmetic of war. They drifted in the channel for 18 minutes before an RAF rescue launch reached them. 18 minutes that stretched like hours. Men prayed, some wept, others stared at the flat gray sky. When the British boat came alongside, Hayes insisted Howell be taken aboard first. "This man stayed with us for 90 miles, fought off 20 enemy fighters, ran out of fuel, and ditched alongside us. He saved 9 lives today," Hayes told the British sailors. The captain looked at Howell, soaked and shaking, and nodded. "Well done, Yank." Well done indeed. 3 days later, Howell was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation cited extraordinary heroism in combat. Hayes and his crew stood at attention as the medal was pinned to Howell's chest. Years after the war, Hayes summarized that day, "We were dead. We knew it. Everyone knew it. Then a P-47 pilot decided we weren't dying that day. He stayed, he fought for us when the odds were impossible, and he ditched rather than leave us alone. That's not courage. That's something beyond courage." "I don't have a word for it," Hayes said. James Howell returned to civilian life and rarely spoke of his service. When people asked about the medal, he changed the subject. The crew never forgot. Until Howell's death in 1998, he received Christmas cards every year from the families of the men he'd saved. 9 lives, 90 miles, one choice that defined what it meant to be a warrior. The airmen who flew these missions knew sacrifice in ways most never will. They flew into hell because someone had to, and they stayed when they should have fled, for brothers do not abandon brothers. If this tale moved you, honor their memory by sharing these stories with family and friends so these acts of heroism live on. Next time, we'll tell of the B-24 pilot who landed his burning bomber to free a trapped crew. Until then, remember,